It seemed to me that there, again, for me it kind of has the echoes of the earlier questions on homiletics. It seems to me that understanding of the calling in some way almost precludes the insistence on disciples. That is, that centering the mystery of the human being and of what you can be that exceeds what you understand yourself to be, and your recognition of that possibility in the student always requires then some kind of disinclination to insist on a particular way of thinking or attempting to replicate your own thought in a student. And
well, yeah, you can be nothing but the impetus for speech to arise. And I clearly articulate that in that essay on the implications of psychological thought. I reread it just the other day to pick that up, and I was surprised at how much I was talking upon the listening, hearkening aspects of the teaching experience, and that the teacher who doesn't listen, it doesn't bring forth speech unless you listen for it. And that the research evidence, for instance, that Arno and other people picked up is that teachers from kindergarten on through grade school, after 10 seconds of silence, have to feel that they have to fill the void. And that filling the void by the teacher prohibits the expression coming out of the student.
The trouble with the Jacobs work, and so much that seem to follow it, is the risk of the formulaic. Because this kind of understanding that the 10-second thing, for me, it seems nested in relationship. It can't be understood as a generalizable.
Oh, I would agree with that. No, I'd agree with that. Yeah. I'm not sure. You're emphasizing relationship, and I guess I wouldn't use the phrase because I think I was too heavily influenced by I-thou, by Buber. And Buber doesn't talk about that as a relationship, I don't think. Now maybe he does, but I've never picked it up. I indeed talk about meeting the other, being with the other, things of that kind. But I don't talk about the relationship between the teacher and student. I talk about being with one another in that kind of language.
That's my reading too.
Yeah.
That you forefront these categories.
And that's why that essay on the relationship, new modes of man's relationship to man, is indeed on focus on conversation rather than relationship. That the significance of relationship is only shown by the nature of the conversation.
But I did find references to relationship, and at some point, I'm going to develop that because I'm doing this paper on study, and I mentioned last night that at some point I mentioned that I'm working off McClintock, but I'm also working off you. And if you want to see that at any point, but at any rate, but part of it is my own. I know it's my own inclination because I always emphasize the particularistic, not to the exclusion of these more. Right, but.
And that ties in. And Joseph and I were talking about this earlier in terms of our reading skills. Which I picked up by knowing when I first went to teach college that I had too much I wanted to read, and so I took, a quick reading course, whoever the lady was. Yeah, and it was very helpful. I really did find things until I hit Heidegger, at which point speed reading was a detriment. It was a major problem. Well, one of the things that Ellen focuses on in her Old Testament is that you students have to slow down in terms of your reading, which means that you also have to listen to the text.
Nice.
And that means slow reading and listening rather than reading into the text. It's exegesis rather than eisegesis.
That seems like a profound point.
Well, I don't know if it's a profound point.
It's a very profound point. But for me, I would say, as your PhD supervisor, Joseph, that matters much less the number of texts, but how carefully you listen to the ones.
And that I learned basically by the difficulty of trying to understand Heidegger. And what Heidegger required or what Heidegger did for me was what a second and third language does for somebody else. It was a totally different frame of reference, which highlighted then in my later work the power of language in the educational.
That's a constant thing.
Yeah, I was aware of it earlier, but that really.
I was wrong about saying Heidegger shows up in 62. You were right, of course, it comes to the mid-60s.
Right.
But your concern with language shows up.
Yeah, because I was reading stuff on language. I was reading stuff on poetry. I wasn't much of a poet reader, but I was reading stuff on poetry.
Right.
And Langer, clearly would move you in that direction in terms of what's the difference between discursive thought and non-discursive thought, presentational forms, and logical forms, and so on and so forth. And it also shows up in Tillich in terms of his couple sections there on knowledge and the nature of knowledge. Which
you draw on Tillich for your knowledge.
The first volume of Tillich was very influential in terms of my epistemological understanding. I don't know where I was before then, but his few sections on knowledge I found to be extremely powerful.
I thought of Levinas, although you don't.
Well, Levinas came late in my career, so to speak, and I had sort of given up philosophy by the time people were reading Levinas.
Because you have at some point, I have referenced, content is otherness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no question about that. That's a theme that I developed. I don't remember which essay, but it's someplace in there. Yeah, it's someplace. But there's no question about that. Content is indeed.
It's a very powerful assertion because it echoes with alterity. It echoes with ethics and theological.
Content is anything which is not I that confronts me. And theoretically it challenges me, whereas prejudicial thought challenges the other. And if we're indeed open to otherness, that means that we have to recognize our own vulnerability and say, why are they living that way and speaking that way, and why am I not doing it? And do I become defensive about it, or do I become vulnerable in it? And if I'm vulnerable in it, what kind of love relationship am I in, or am not in, that permits or prohibits vulnerability? And the explosion of vulnerability requires the presence of love. So
there's the relationship.
Yeah.
Love is expressed in relationship.
Yeah. You're really hung up with relationship.
It's true.
I'm not.
It's because I'm focusing.
No, I understand that, but I find it forcing my thought rather than eliciting.
I don't want to do
No,
that.
you're not. I won't let you.
No, I know that. I'm confident of that. But it seems to me there's a shift there over time in your work.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
Because early on, you talk about making the curriculum becomes public wealth. You use that phrase.
Right.
Teachers' calling is to make public wealth accessible to children.
Right.
Which enables them to be empowered.
Right.
And that's more of a secular idea.
No, I don't think it's a secular. See, that's where I would deal with. That's where I want to deal with the larger grammar of curriculum. It's not different. It's a different component of the puzzle that needs to be acknowledged as distinct. Content in schools, and this is where I would begin to make a difference. Content in general is that which is different than I. But then what happens in schools is people taking this otherness and making it as a gift or a potential gift to the student. Now, frequently it's not a gift, it's a demand. But it has to be seen as the way the adult community gives its prizes, its stuff, its wealth, its cultural wealth to the young. And in doctoral programs, and we were talking about this earlier, in economics, we're not going to divulge that wealth until you show that you are subservient to the tradition. And only then will it be exposed. We do that too much in doctoral work. You can't become it until you show that you've mastered the field as it is, which means you're not going to destroy our field. But it's only then that you can indeed, in a sense, get the real wealth, which is the problems, the difficulties, and so on and so forth, that need a solution.
So two points. One is that in this early phrasing, the teacher's calling is one of translation, how to make, at least that's how
I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah.
I'm sure
You
that's.
mentioned translation earlier.
I'm sure that's the case.
Which has to do with communication.
Yeah.
And dialogic. And
Yeah. Now, see, I'm not sure where I worked on this idea of wealth. I know it's later because I remember Mary Boyce picked it up in her dissertation, not in a dissertation, but in her later work. So it's a later development in my thinking.
The other piece of it is, though, in these last series of remarks, it underscores that you acknowledge, if not respect, the student's right to refuse the gift.
Oh, by all means. However, has the right, however, politically it has consequences. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And again, the giving the gift carries with it potential dangers. Because the gift may indeed lead to behaviors and lead to newness that is extremely uncomfortable for the giver.
Well, it certainly did in the 60s, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. Did that take care of everything in the front pages?
No, there are more. I'm doing the 10-second thing. I was thinking now, I got stuck also in thinking about the 60s and now. And it seems to me that the social media, I don't know if you care to comment on this, but it seems to me the social media provide the opportunity for an obliteration of the gift.
Agreed.
A refusal of the gift. That
I agree.
doesn't have to be confrontational.
No, because there's inherently social media and the technology carries with it, in a sense, a limitation of gift giving.
It certainly narrows the range.
It narrows the range. Yeah, it has power possibilities, but the power can be both positive and negative. It becomes constraining as well as liberating.
I actually had a question which I brought up the first day about the talking typewriter because you.
The what?
The talking typewriter.
Oh.
Do you remember? Did you have one, or did TC have one?
No, it was an important piece of literature back in those days because it was so fascinating. It was indeed the use of technology, new technology to teach writing, and it then made. And this is very much Ricoeurian in some ways in terms of the relationship between speech and reading and the necessity to find out what is the relationship between the printed word and speech, and by giving kids the power to make print, it showed in a sense the relationship of how print comes out of speech. And if they're only dealing with somebody else's print, rather than the making of the print.
I see.
Now, and that's the
and
that's not only crucial there, but that's crucial in everything today. In that we give kids the consequences of our coding, but we don't necessarily give the kids the power to code in technology. And in the elementary school, we should not simply be giving them books, we should be making them aware of who makes the books and that you too can make the books. Now that applies to all then forms of media. And that is not being done today, in part because those who code don't want to share their power. Or those who own the economics of coding don't want to share their power. And so people are caught then into others' discursive, non-discursive realms. There's our friend. And that's why, again, in the elementary school that I was principal of, I wasn't responsible for this, but our librarian was a superb librarian, precisely in terms of that. She would have the older kids go down into the kindergarten, listen to their stories, transcribe the stories, turn them into a book form, and put the books back in the library. Yeah. And we would spend time with kids making films and things of that kind. So they would be aware that technology is something that empowers, not just simply limits power.
So I'm thinking about your that earlier distinction you drew between the lyrical elements of your speaking and the papers that were in fact addresses and those that were written for maybe for publication, and how the
I didn't write too many for publication. We should go back over that someday and identify.
They're really all
The ones that I did on the beach
right.
were clearly written forms, and we might go through that and identify which of those came out of speeches, because almost all of them came.
So we have that with the Christian education guy. He went through that on the bibliography and highlighted which ones were published and which ones were unpublished.
Right.
So we actually technically would have that.
Yeah. So I most of my really significant papers came out of speeches, including the one at Ohio State.
Well, I think they're all significant. If you
Huh?
don't mind me. I think they're all significant, if you don't mind me saying. But there's a difference in their force and their character.
And I agree. And the composing of a speech is quite different than a composing of an essay.
That's right.
And I don't have any trouble composing speeches. If you were to ask me to write something for your conference in June, I couldn't do it. If you ask me to talk about some things, I will prepare a reasonably careful presentation.
But the talking typewriter is fascinating because it blurs the genres.
Right. Yeah.
I get it now.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And that's also true in the science area in terms of what theories are about. They invite you to explore something. They aren't just a description of something. And helping people learn how to create theories and then to unprove them or disprove them is crucial. So we introduce people to a whole relationship between being in the world and talking about their being in the world. Kind of thing. And when you talk, you are indeed talking about something. We need to deal with that, yeah.
How would you deal with that?
I don't know. I hadn't thought of that, but ongoing small tape. What do you call it? The little thing you plug in, and tape goes round and round. Then you reverse it. We were making those damn things.
You were making them?
Yeah.
Like manufacturing?
Yeah. We were in the elementary school learning how to use them. But he also was invited by Apple computer when they had their first little, what do they call it? Little one, square face kind of thing, a very small one. He was invited with a bunch of other educators to go out to California and to look at the educational possibilities of computers.
That would have made him rich if he had gotten that.
Well, and he didn't get enough support from some of us. And I thought, what's the great deal? And I couldn't see ahead to that either in some ways. I thought, okay, so you teach math that way, but what you do when you teach math that way is mess up the physical dimensions of math. Right. That it's an operation. It's not just a symbol. It is indeed an operation. And I was aware of the gradual disappearance of operating behavior as it's related to symbols. So I wasn't gung-ho on that. I would still be not gung-ho about that, but I recognize there are other advantages to computers. But the other...
1980 or something.
Oh, it was earlier than 1980.
The 70s.
Oh yeah, it was in the 70s. Oh, clearly. The other thing that Teachers College was doing at that time, and this is Phil Lang, that's when telephones began to deal with the capability of having, a speaker in the center of a table and being able to carry on conversations. We had kids in our elementary school talking to kids in New Zealand and Australia. And that was in the 60s. That was 63, 62.
That must have been something to arrange time-wise.
Yeah, it was. It was. I'm not sure how it was done, but yeah. More comfortable, so.
So if it's all right, we won't capture the drama of the event, but I would like to acknowledge that while we were off camera that Dwayne emphasized how important it was that the course that I'm going to offer and which he may visit in June, that's focused on his work, that it emphasize historical context, and that it be focused really on the problematics of the field, and that it have as its intended outcome a kind of moving the field forward. Really, I think in some ways accepting the challenges bequeathed.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And one of my questions is, would you alter those at all?
I would have to look at those. I can't.
Yeah. Well, if it's all right, or
Yeah, you can go ahead and
I'll bring them over to you.
well, you can read them off.
Well, actually, you already answered one of them. One of them was to engage in public discourse about education, and the first day you spoke to that.
Yeah, no, it's still a major problem as far as I'm concerned. It seems to me that and I failed here, and I don't know whether you failed or not,
Well, of course I have.
but in terms of writing skills, we need to teach them both to write for the academy and to write for the public, and those are two different writing styles.
Well, this guy is an excellent writer in his direct communication.
Oh.
We're working on the academic part.
Not an academic writer.
But he would be an excellent person.
Okay, and if I were to start over again, I think I would make sure that I never required much writing because I never was required to produce writing-wise. I would not do that today. I would require much more writing, and I know you do, yeah. And I would require that some of the writing be aimed at parents. Yeah,
right. Well,
yeah.
we could build that into the course.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea, in fact.
We could get these challenges bequeathed. I could reorganize the course in a more focused way that would address your insistence that you won't come unless it's...
Yeah, you do a good job on the imagination, it seems to me. That's been one of your strong points. You pick up literature as a way of awakening their imaginative capabilities.
But as a topic, you're the one you and Maxine, and and at some point you reference Egan as well, and he's been very involved.
Yeah, no, he has, right.
Kieran had a heart attack, by the way.
Oh, did he?
But he survived, so
Wow.
he's all right.
And you also deal with intellectual traditions and achievements. I'm not sure that in the past, I think you're doing it now, that has to be indeed historicized.
Yes, that's right.
I don't think any of us have done that adequately.
Right.
Except maybe Herb and I don't know who else, but
Yes, but he was writing history. And,
yeah, that's right.
Right. No, it wasn't, and I always consider it now.
Yeah.
Although I'm late to the game, but I consider it now an essential aspect of...
Right. Well, and the curriculum field was late to that game. I mean, it was so present oriented, so problems.
And procedure oriented.
Yeah.
Tyler.
Yeah. No. Right.
Steps,
Oh no.
right?
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, we still need to do a dissection of Tyler.
That's the first. That's the first one, is surpassing the technical. And the technical, I think the procedural would be subsumed in that category, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It would be. I think a careful exegesis of Tyler needs to be done. Maybe it has been done. I don't know. But I'm aware that what he did was fundamentally such a potential disservice. And one of the places that it shows is that in constructing your educational objectives, you consult your educational philosophy.
That's right.
And that totally then destroys the function of philosophy in the curricular, in the educational process.
It's a box to tick off.
Oh, it was disaster.
Take that point somewhere.
Yeah, I know I do, yeah.
Can I ask a question? What's the difference between dealing with the present problems of the field and the historical problems?
Because the present problems are historically determined.
They persisted.
Yeah.
But and your call is to deal with those historical problems. And that's
No, I want to be able to deal with the problems today and make sure that we recognize the historical precedents.
Because we still have the technical orientation in terms of the formulaic.
Well, and Tyler was responsible by being indeed a test maker who then focused on curriculum development, which means he took the test-taking mind and turned it into the curriculum-making mind.
And more broadly, it has to do with instrumentality. which you also critique at one point, this kind of, and Jim McDonald does too, instrumental rationality.
Yeah.
And so you get that even with the social justice stuff.
And
Only
incidentally,
if you teach black history, then prejudice will go away.
right. The instrumental technology is also the term instrumental knowledge is a term that Tillich uses.
Is that right?
I'm quite
It's
sure
a
of that.
Frankfurt School.
Yeah, it's a Frank. Well, see, that's yeah.
Right.
Right. So that be worth looking at the first volume. Do you have a copy of it?
I do not have a first copy.
Yeah.
First volume.
So surpass the technical.
And there are people. Yeah, well, yeah, we've done that, and we did the significance of the imagination and the intellectual traditions and achievements. Engage in public discourse about education. We've referred to that in terms of the writing and the other. I don't know why the educator, except for very few, have not been significant voices in the struggles in education over the last 10 years or so, maybe longer than that. I don't know.
So we have two colleagues in the department, Wayne Ross and Stephen Petrina, who were very much engaged during the BC teacher strike, writing letters to the paper and also being interviewed on television. And we had a faculty seminar to acknowledge their engagement. But this could also be a kind of antecedent, a kind of reference for this problem.
Right.
And of course, this.
We could do, you wouldn't have the time for it, but one thing to do would be role-playing in terms of,
Yes, right.
you know.
We could. No, we could have time for that,
Yeah.
of course. We could make time for that. And we could have Steve and Wayne, or if they could.
Well, and the Speak Out for Children and Youth, I certainly did that in that power and poetry thing.
That's right. Acknowledge Steve Mann's work on that.
And that's, again, we get the non-educators doing that rather than the educators doing that.
Right.
And part of that is the breakdown of the way teachers' unions have misused their calling, and they assume it is for taking care of the teacher rather than the teacher helping to take care of children in society.
And even fail to take care of themselves.
Right.
Madeline has a lovely paper called Other People's Children.
Does she?
And which also addresses this issue of teachers' alienation in some way. That is partially teachers' fault, but it's also administrators' faults, and the fault lies everywhere, so to speak. Right. Yeah. So you wouldn't change them, you wouldn't supplement, you wouldn't... Well, I don't know if I would supplement, I think I would need to... Because the thing that... Yeah, I think I would add some other things there. As if that's not enough, but well, the focus on the gift giving, content as gift giving, I think that could be articulated in such a way. I don't know how I would phrase it, but I don't. We educators do not assume adequate responsibility for cultural wealth and its maintenance and its continuity. And that's partly the eclipse of academic knowledge by employable skills. I would agree with that. Started with the competency stuff. I would agree with that, yeah. And again, I address that. And that's Hannah Arendt. Right. No one should be a teacher unless they love the world as much as they love children. Right. It's a beautiful statement. Yeah. Just a beautiful, coming from her, it's amazing, but... I have a doctoral graduate who's at Penn State now, Hannah Spector, whose dissertation was much focused on around. Yeah, that's a beautiful expression of it. And I think I play with that in some of my later essays. Yes, Arendt shows up a number of times. Well, and again, that essay on why be a teacher, I do deal, in a sense, with that.